This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. So here's what Trump had to say yesterday, just kind of restating it before we get to Professor Swain. Trump on relitigating the both sides argument that he sparked on Saturday.
Define alt-right to me. You define it. Go ahead.
Well, I'm saying,
define it for me. Come on, let's go. Define
Senator
it.
McCain defined them as the same group.
Okay, what about the alt-left that came... Excuse me. What about the alt-left that came charging at the, as you say, the alt-right? Do they have any semblance of guilt?
This is Senator McCain's statement.
Let me ask you this. What about the fact that they came charging with clubs in their hands, swinging clubs? Do they have any problem? I think they do.
And Trump continued.
Was George Washington a slave owner? So will George Washington now lose his status? Are we going to take down... Excuse me. Are we going to take down statues to George Washington? How about Thomas Jefferson? What do you think of Thomas Jefferson? You like him? Okay, good. Are we going to take down the statue? Because he was a major slave owner. Now we're going to take down his statue. So you know what? It's fine. You're changing history, you're changing culture, and you had people, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally. But you had many people in that group other than neo-Nazis and white nationalists, okay? And the press has treated them absolutely unfairly. Now, in the other group also, you had some fine people, but you also had troublemakers, and you see them come with the black outfits and with the helmets and with the baseball bats. You had a lot of bad people in the other group.
So there's bad and good on both sides, and when it comes to cultural iconography, like statues and monuments and memorials, what's the limiting principle is sort of what he was saying. There's a lot of sort of what he was saying that applies to what Trump had to offer yesterday. So to help us with that, we're pleased to be joined by the aforesaid Vanderbilt political science professor and author of the 2002 book, The New White Nationalism in America. She is Dr. Carol Swain. Dr. Swain, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. I should correct you and tell you that yesterday was my last official day at Vanderbilt.
Oh.
I now fall into the ranks of the retired.
All right. So, Professor Emeritus from Vanderbilt. How about that?
That'll do for now.
Okay, very good. Well, congratulations on your long career. I've familiar with your work. I've seen you on the cable talk shows from time to time. It's always very interesting, which is why we want to have you on this show. Also, to cleanse our experience with Jay Cutler, a Vanderbilt grad. So we wanted to have somebody from Vanderbilt that could resuscitate its reputation in Chicago.
Okay.
So your reaction to what Donald Trump said yesterday at his press conference, kind of even give us the last 4 days from what he said Saturday to then the statement he made Monday to then the press conference yesterday.
Well, first I have to say that very few people in the media who are discussing this topic really understand, the nuances of it. I agree with the president that they are painting a lot of people with a broad brush. When I wrote The New White Nationalism in America is Challenge to Integration, I called it the New White Nationalism to distinguish it from white supremacy, the neo-Nazis, and the Klan. And so the whole point of the book was that there was a new movement developing in America that included people as its leaders who were well educated. They were not espousing racial violence or epithet. In fact, they made their arguments using the language of identity and multiculturalism, and they were very concerned about what they saw as the civil rights of white people being trampled. The book was a warning because I felt that they were making rational arguments using social science data, FBI statistics, science, they were making arguments that I thought would be persuasive to the mainstream white population. I had felt for some time that you cannot argue that every group has an interest and they should be able to identify and celebrate their heritage and then say not white. And so what I found was there were a lot of grievances that white people had. And as far as the president saying there were many different people at that rally, I'm sure he's correct that there were the neo-Nazis, the Klansmen. We saw them, but there were also the activists that are calling themselves the alt-right. I call them the new white nationalism. And then you had everyday people who were concerned about the destruction of Southern monuments. These are not people that hate blacks. And I would say that among the alt-right, there are people who are pro-white, but that doesn't mean they hate other groups. And then you had leftist whites and blacks. And so I think the president was trying to explain something that the media doesn't understand, or they're deliberately trying not to understand.
Yeah, but I mean, with somebody who signed up to go to that event, the neo-Nazi James, who used his car as a weapon and killed an innocent bystander. I mean, Heather Heyer, she's getting buried today, and for President Trump yesterday to almost as he was sympathetic to the white nationalists, I think it's inexcusable.
I think that you had. I don't believe that people went there to kill anyone. I think that once you had the police not separating the counter-protesters from the protesters, they should have had at least 500 yards between the groups. I would imagine that young man was someone that went there and got angered by something that was said or something that was done and just acted on his own. And we see all the time that you have people who are leftist as well as the far right. They act on their own, and you cannot control a large crowd. You don't know who's going to mingle in there. And so I think that it's a mistake to say that, that the people who went there to protest the destruction of the monuments, that they went there for any reason other than to protest, which is their First Amendment right. The counter-protesters bear some responsibility.
Well, when it comes to white identity politics, white nationalism, as you're describing it, it seems to me there's a lot of purposeful muddying of the waters, right? Rod Dreyer has a good piece in The American Conservative on this, where he is reacting to a piece that was written by Perry Bacon Jr. at 538, using language that is not unfamiliar. Protect conservative Christians. That's code word for white identity politics, even though, of course, there are non-white conservative Christians. Protect police officers. That's white identity politics, even though, of course, there are non-white police officers. In fact, like half the police force of Chicago police force is black or Hispanic. But so if you're on the side of police, if you're a Christian and you're a white male in particular, then you're part of alt-right. And as you're distinguishing, there are gradations between KKK and neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and the so-called alt-right, the those that have grievances essentially, but are otherwise nonviolent. And that's separate and distinct from people who are just philosophically conservative or support law enforcement. And in the D.C. press corps, all of that gets muddled or gets categorized under the rubric of white identity politics or whiteness.
Well, one of the things I said in my book was that white interest and white identity would be the next logical stage for identity politics in America, and that if we wanted to have racial harmony and racial integration, we needed to move away from so much identity politics and embrace the American national identity. Mm-hmm. Because as long as you have Black Lives Matter, and I believe that they are Marxist groups, and that some of their leaders across the country have espoused hatred and violence towards whites. You have the new Black Panther Party. You have a lot of militancy among blacks, as well as that Antifa, the anti-fascists. On the political left, they are instigators. We saw them go to the Trump rallies to spark violence. And we know that George Soros has funded groups prior to go and to disrupt the free speech of other people. And so the media is totally ignoring the responsibility of the other side and just trying to paint everything that happened in Charlottesville on President Trump and his supporters, whether or not they're, just your everyday Christians in the Midwest and in the South that are certainly not alt-right, but they are concerned about the destruction of monuments of history. And the president's right. There is no logical ending place. I think that Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, Woodrow Wilson will be fair game next. And I also believe that 50 to 100 years from now, the country may move in a direction that if you follow this trend, they may decide that Dr. Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks and some of the icons on the left, that their memorials and monuments should be torn down as well. I think we are taking a dangerous course. We should not be judging historical figures by the values we hold today.
But it's just because we live in everyone's trying to be politically correct, don't you think?
It is because we're trying to be politically correct, and we should be trying to learn from history. I think there's so many mistakes being made, and on our colleges and university campuses, the administrators are just totally throwing up their hands, and they're allowing a small band of people to dictate what's taking place. A lot of the unrest at the rallies that have happened across the country have been leftist university students and sometimes faculty. They're doing a lot of destruction in this country. And with Black Lives Matter, you may remember that they became quite incensed if anyone said all lives matter.
Right.
I mean, they were clear, and they, by their own behavior, contradict that they believe Black Lives Matter, because if they believe Black Lives Matter, they would be protesting the violence that takes place in cities like Chicago, and also the extraordinarily high black abortion rate, and just so much dysfunction in the black community. If Black Lives Matter, that should be their focus because it would affect more people.
Let me ask you this, though, in terms of a criticism I have for President Trump yesterday and get your reaction to it. One of the things it seems to me that he did is a little bit of moral equivalence. And it was a problem when President Obama did it with respect to Dallas police officers and essentially a sop to Black Lives Matter. And so it's a problem when Trump does it, if you agree that he's doing it. And so there's something that is unique about white supremacists that requires a unique moral clarity because of the original sin of this nation, slavery, and then the 100 years of Jim Crow and state-sponsored racism subsequent to the Civil War. And it would have, I thought, behooved President Trump to provide that historical context and separate that from the Antifa, the leftist thugs of the day as something distinct and different. And then if we could dispatch that or categorize it appropriately, then we can focus more equally across the board in terms of modern day violence in pursuit of a particular ideology.
I kind of think that he tried to do that when he said that we, condemned the neo-Nazis and the white supremacists, but the people at that rally, that they were not all white supremacists and neo-Nazis. And my research, when I conducted my research in early 2000, only a small percentage of Americans, a minuscule percentage of Americans were interested in those far right groups.
Right.
The Klan membership, the neo-Nazis, those numbers were dwindling. But the people who were concerned about white people and white civil rights and saying that whites needed leaders like Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton, those new white nationalists, I saw them growing and making their arguments in a way that I knew that they would tap into the grievances of a larger white population. Whether white people speak up or not, I think that they are very upset about racial double standards, racial preferences, immigration that they believe works against them, minority crime where they believe that hate crimes against race are treated differently.
She is Dr. Carol Swain, the recently retired professor of political science at Vanderbilt University. She's the author of the 2002 book, that turned out to be prescient on so many of these issues we've been discussing this week. The New White Nationalism in America is the book. Dr. Swain, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.